Most boat owners think all outboards are safe if they run fine, but the 17 dangerous motors can blow up, overheat, leak fuel, or die at full throttle without warning. Some were recalled, some killed their own companies, and some are still being sold today. Let's find out. If boat engines had warning labels, the OMC Ficht 225 would need one the size of the cowlin. This motor was supposed to be OMC's big comeback. Instead, it turned into the reason they didn't come back at all. Mechanics still talk about these engines the way veterans talk about war stories. The issue? OMC rushed direct injection tech into production before it was fully tested, and the Ficht system rewarded them by detonating cylinders like popcorn, fuel leaks, lean conditions, sudden powerhead meltdown. It was a greatest hits album of all the things an engine should never do. The Coast Guard even issued advisories. When the government tells you, hey, maybe stop using that, you know it's serious. So if you ever see a Ficht 225 on Craigslist labeled runs good, just know it ran OMC straight into bankruptcy too. The early 2000s Mercury Optimax series is living proof that even big brands can have big failures. These engines ran beautifully until they didn't, and when they didn't, the air compressor usually went first, loudly, violently, and with enough drama to ruin your whole weekend. The Optimax compressor was like a lottery machine, except instead of winning money, you won a blown power head. When the compressor seized, the engine instantly went lean, cooking pistons faster than a street food vendor. Owners didn't ask if it would fail, they asked when. To be fair, Mercury eventually fixed the issues. But the early models, let's just say they kept mechanics employed. Forever. If someone selling one tells you, just needs a new compressor, politely walk away. Because that's like saying, the plane flies great, just ignore the missing wing. Yamaha makes some of the most reliable outboards on earth. And then there's the early 3.3-liter HPDI series. These engines were the exception nobody asked for. They looked great, sounded great, and then, surprise, they'd scorch a piston at mid-range like it was their hobby. The problem was an oil delivery and injector calibration issue. At certain RPMs, the motor ran too lean, turning pistons into molten souvenirs. Owners described it perfectly. It ran amazing, right up until it didn't run at all. The HPDI also loved to clog filters, starve the engine of fuel, and then pretend it did nothing wrong. Classic red flag behavior. Some later models improved, but the early 250/300S, they were fast, powerful, and one bad injector away from becoming a very expensive anchor. The first generation Suzuki DF140 is a perfect example of great idea, unfortunate execution. On paper, it was light, fuel efficient, and packed with modern tech. In reality, early DF140s had a midsection corrosion problem so aggressive it could have been sponsored by the ocean itself. The exhaust housing would rot from the inside out, letting hot gases sneak into places they absolutely did not belong. Owners would hear a strange hiss, smell burnt something, and discover their engine was slowly cooking itself like a metal casserole. Then came the water intrusion issues. A few unlucky boaters found water in their cylinders without ever having submerged the motor. That's never a good sign. Suzuki fixed these problems in later generations. Today's DF140 is fantastic, but those early units, they're the marine equivalent of dating someone who swears they've changed. Maybe they have, but don't risk it. Honda is known for engines that outlive the boat they're bolted to, except the early BF225. These models had a midsection corrosion problem so infamous it earned the nickname the saltwater death chamber. Inside the exhaust housing, corrosion would quietly eat its way through metal until one day, boom, water would leak back into the cylinders. And nothing ruins a peaceful day on the water like discovering your engine has been drinking seawater like it's a protein shake. Owners reported sudden stalling, rough running, and in some cases, full power head failure. Not because they abused the engine, but because the engine abused itself. The cruel twist? You couldn't even see the corrosion until it was too late. Newer Hondas fixed all these issues and are rock solid, but the early BF225 approached like a ticking time bomb wrapped in shiny Honda paint. The Tohatsu TLDI 90 was supposed to be a clean, efficient alternative to old-school two-strokes. Instead, it earned a reputation for fuel system quirks that ranged from mildly annoying to grab a fire extinguisher levels of concerning. The high-pressure fuel filter had a design flaw where a bolt inside the cowl could literally rub a hole in it. Yes, a vibrating metal bolt slowly grinding through a fuel filter. What could possibly go wrong? Owners began noticing fuel smells, random stalling, and fuel mist in the cowl. Mechanics discovered the chafing issue and collectively sighed like exhausted parents. In fairness, once updated, the TLDIs run well, but neglected ones, one small rub in the wrong spot, and the engine could go from starts right up to let's evacuate the boat. If you see a used TLDI 90, ask one question first. Has the fuel system fix actually been done? The Nissan NSF 9.8A was a popular little portable outboard until people realized it had a habit of doing something no engine should ever do: store fuel inside the cowl. Not intentionally, it just liked leaking fuel into places fuel should never be. The problem came from awkward fuel line routing that let gasoline pool behind the intake. So while you were cruising along happily, your engine was basically creating a tiny, flammable swimming pool under the hood. Cute? Maybe. Safe? Absolutely not. Owners often notice the smell first, then the drips, then the nervous glances toward the fire extinguisher. Tilt the engine wrong and you could end up with fuel running where gravity decided to take it. Nissan eventually improved the design. But if you see an early NSF 9.8A for sale listed as just needs a tune-up, remember, it might also need a fire marshal. The late 80s Mariner 135/150, Mercury's silver-painted cousin, had a personality best described as exciting in all the wrong ways. They made good power, but their ignition systems aged like unrefrigerated milk. These motors were notorious for switchbox failures, random timing jumps, and the occasional surprise shutdown at 40 miles per hour. Nothing like losing spark mid-run to make you reconsider your life decisions. Mechanics still joke that these engines didn't need spark plugs. They needed therapy. The gear cases also weren't known for longevity. Hard shifts and high RPMs had a bad habit of encouraging internal parts to seek freedom. A few well-maintained units are still out there, owned by people who deserve medals. But if someone selling one says, "Runs great, just a little finicky," what they mean is, it runs great today. Tomorrow is a mystery. The Chrysler 105 is a vintage icon, but also a vintage headache. This engine comes from an era when engineers were experimenting enthusiastically. The result was a motor with weak ignition components, fragile gear cases, and parts availability today that makes archaeologists look spoiled. Owners often faced random misfires, gear lurches, and electrical gremlins that appeared and disappeared like they were playing hide and seek. And if something breaks, good luck. Finding replacement parts for a Chrysler 105 is like hunting for a unicorn holding a winning lottery ticket. Sure, the motor has charm. Yes, it'll push a boat. But would you trust it far from shore? Only if you enjoy paddling practice. If you see one for sale listed as classic, be cautious. Sometimes classic really means dangerous and nobody makes parts for it. The Selva 40X is one of those engines that makes you go, "Oh, that's interesting. What exactly is a Selva?" And then, after owning one for a season, your next question is usually, why is it overheating again? Early 2000s units had a coolant passage casting defect that caused blockages deep inside the engine. The problem? You couldn't see it, predict it, or outrun it. The water passages were rough and inconsistent from the factory, so your engine basically played roulette with its own temperature. Owners would be cruising fine 1 minute and watching the overheat alarm light up the next. Even worse, flushing didn't fix the issue. The blockage was literally built in. Once Selva corrected the casting process, the engines became reliable, but those early 40X models, treat them like hot sauce, great in tiny doses, disastrous if mishandled. The Johnson 175 Fast Strike is a legend. Fast, loud, torquey, and genuinely fun, right up until it decides to spontaneously self-destruct. These motors from 97 to 98 were known for detonation issues that could melt pistons like a blowtorch on butter. The problem came from aggressive factory timing combined with inconsistent coolant across cylinders. Add in a bit of bad fuel or a long WOT run, and suddenly the engine sounded like it was full of angry marbles. Not ideal. Mechanics also reported sleeve shift problems, where the cylinder sleeve could literally move out of alignment. Yes, the engine had parts that tried to escape. Fans still swear by the Fast Strike because it performs beautifully when healthy. But buying one today is like dating someone with a dramatic past. Thrilling, but you'd better be prepared for surprises. The Force 120, the unofficial mascot of engines you inherit, not engines you buy. These motors were famously packaged with bayliner boats in the 90s, creating a generation of owners who learned the meaning of temperamental the hard way. The Force 120 suffered from weak metallurgy, questionable ignition components, and gear cases that aged like bananas. At idle, they could cough. At mid-range, they could stumble. And at WOT, they could, let's just say, choose not to participate. Part support today is almost non-existent, and many components are discontinued entirely. So if something breaks, and it will, your best mechanic may become the Facebook Marketplace seller with the same motor in pieces. Some die-hard fans love them, but for most owners, the Force 120 wasn't just a motor. It was a character-building experience. The Volvo Penta 8.1G should have been a masterpiece. Big displacement, smooth power, and classic Volvo toughness. Instead, the early production models earned a reputation for fuel rail gremlins that could turn a sunny day into a Coast Guard incident report. The issue? A faulty fuel rail and injector design that sometimes delivered lean mixtures right when the engine needed fuel the most. Think of it like running a marathon and your water bottle randomly disappears. Pistons didn't appreciate that surprise. Even worse, the fuel rail defect could cause leaks inside the hot engine bay, not exactly where you want gasoline misting around. Some boats legitimately caught fire before the recall fixes were released. To Volvo's credit, the updated rails solved the problem, and modern versions are rock solid. But those early 8.1 gigabyte units? Handle them like fireworks. Fun when everything goes right. Explosive when it doesn't. Yamaha's reputation for bulletproof reliability is legendary, which is why the early 2010s M8 and M9.9 models shocked everyone by leaking fuel. Yes, the most reliable outboard brand on earth accidentally built a tiny fire hazard. The problem came from defective fuel caps and vent seals. Tilt the engine, store it on its side, or sometimes just look at it the wrong way, and fuel could seep out around the cap. Many owners discovered the issue when they lifted the cowl and got hit with the unmistakable smell of, "This shouldn't be happening." These little engines ran great, but the leaking vents made them risky to store on small boats, dinghies, or garages. Nothing ruins a weekend trip like discovering your outboard dripped fuel all over your gear. Yamaha fixed the caps with a recall, but those early units, treat them like babies, keep them upright and watch them closely. The Lehr Propane 5.0 horsepower is living proof that a genius idea can still go horribly wrong. On paper, propane outboards sounded like the future. Clean, simple, and no messy gasoline. In practice, the Lehr 5HP had vapor lock issues so dramatic it could have starred in a cooking show. The engine would run beautifully until it warmed up. Then the regulator would heat soak, pressure would spike, and suddenly the motor would stall like someone unplugged it. Restarting it required patience, prayer, and sometimes an ice pack. Add in regulator failures, sticky valves, and inconsistent throttle response, and the Lehr 5HP went from innovative to don't wander too far from shore. The funniest part? When it worked great. But when it didn't, you learned very quickly how heavy a 5 horsepower feels when you're paddling home. Propane was a brave idea. This engine just wasn't the one to make it mainstream. The first generation Mercury Verado 275 was ambitious, supercharged, smooth, surprisingly quiet, and occasionally one bad moment away from needing a tow. Early models had steering pump issues that would randomly decide, not today, leaving the driver muscling the wheel like they were docking a cruise ship. Then there were the early gear cases, which had all the durability of a breadstick under stress. High speeds and heavy hulls sometimes push them past their comfort zone, resulting in unpleasant noises followed by, well, silence. Expensive silence. Add in high-pressure hose weaknesses and the occasional power steering fluid leak, and the Verado 275 became a motor you either loved or feared, sometimes both in the same weekend. Modern Verados are excellent, but the first-gen 275? Treat it like a sports car with warning lights. Fun, fast, but always one beep away from drama. The early E-TEC G1 had a reputation for being a small engine with big attitude. Unfortunately, sometimes fatal attitude. A few batches left the factory with injector calibration issues that turned the engine into a magician. 1 minute running perfectly, the next minute making a piston disappear. Owners often praise the power and fuel efficiency right before admitting the engine sometimes coughed, sneezed, or ran lean without warning. A lean running two-stroke at high RPM? That's a recipe for turning aluminum into glitter. Mechanics learned quickly, if a G190HO came in with hesitation or odd mid-range behavior, they checked injectors immediately. And if the owner said, "It only knocks sometimes," everyone in the room sighed. Updated injectors fixed the issue, but uncorrected units are still out there haunting used engine listings. If you find one cheap, ask yourself, do you feel lucky? If this list saved you from buying a floating headache, hit subscribe and tap the bell so you never miss another breakdown that protects your wallet. Drop a comment with the engine you'd never trust again. Until next time, stay smart, stay safe, and keep your boat running right.